The brand new Savage tier is just around the corner, and to help you prepare, I've compiled a list of tips and tricks I've learned over the past few years from raiding every tier on patch. I'll be breaking these down into different phases: pre-patch, week 0, week 1, and Reclears to make things easier to digest for you dum-dums out there. So without any further ado, let's get started. Pre-patch planning. Number 1, find a group with the same goals. This is the most important thing if you're planning to tackle Savage with a static. Make sure you're on the same page about expectations. If you're just starting out and want to try Savage, I recommend a more casual approach. Consider starting later like week 2 or 3, with about 9 to 12 hours per week. But if you're an experienced player that can clear the tier fast, please don't join a casual static and expect everyone to keep up with you. Instead, you can try a more hardcore experience. Join a group that commits 20 plus hours per week and aims to clear quickly. If your goals don't align with the group, it will only lead to conflict, and I promise you, static drama is fun to watch but not fun to be a part of. Number 2, have a few million gills ready for raiding. Raiding isn't cheap. In fact, it's the only reason I still bother with dailies and weeklies, because you'll be needing gills for crafted gears, materials, foods, and even pots. If you need pentamelt, you might need around 5 million gills usually, but for a budget setup, 1 to 2 million should cover you just fine. So how do we exactly farm gills right now? There's a lot of videos covering it on YouTube, so you can just search for it. But right now, my favorite is just doing my daily roulette, treasure maps, and if you have some capital to buy items from market board, do leaves. I still do the old Charlene leaves since it's quite cheap to buy the HQ items from market board and immediately turn in for a massive profit. My go-to are Saito Funu and Commanding Craftsman's Wrath. You'll be spending around 300k or less for a 1 million gil profit, but it's indeed quite boring to do. Week 0. On patch before Savage. Number 3. Determine your BIS immediately after patch drops. Your Basin slot or BIS gear is crucial for high-end content. Don't be the one contributing nothing but moral support, because lower gear means less HP, less damage, and more pain for your healers. There's a lot of ways to determine your BIS. You can use tools like Etro, FFXIV gear, and stuff like that. But if you don't really understand how stats tiering works, just copy what the experts recommend. Maybe check the Balance, Ariella, or even Icy Veins. Number 4, do the latest Extreme Trial. With every patch, a new Extreme Trial drops, and it usually rewards the best pre-Savage weapon. Yes, crafted weapons can be pentamelted unlike extreme weapons, but extreme weapons usually have 5 higher item level, which means their base stats are higher. Unless the substats are terrible, extreme weapons will generally be stronger, and they are free. Well, minus the suffering of prog. Number 5, spend wisely on crafted gear. If you're rich, feel free to splurge on a full crafted set with your fancy pentamelts. But if you're like the rest of us, budget wisely. You can always mix crafted gear with normal raid gear. That way you significantly reduce the cost needed for buying or crafting it. But plan ahead which pieces you prioritize since normal raid gear is weekly locked. If you're unsure, skip the loot first while doing the story and decide later. Number 6, cap your tombstones early in week 0 and week 1. The latest tombstones are always needed for unupgraded BIS pieces, which you can later upgrade into BIS gear after getting glaze or twine drops in Savage. Start capping it in week 0 because it's crucial for you to get your first pre-BIS gear piece. But sometimes it's beneficial to not immediately get the gear you need in week 0 because you can technically get 2 weeks worth of tome by doing it early in week 1. Before you start Savage. Unless you're world racing because you don't have time, and of course it kinda depends on your BIS gear. It saves you some gills, and since it's actually needed, you're not wasting your time at all. The fastest way of capping it is probably by doing hunt trains, or if you're not rushed by anything because you're progging the Savage casually, you can always do your dailies since it can give you up to 225 tomes per day, which means you can cap it in only 2 days. Week 1, Savage Release Week. Number 7, read guides and raid plans. If you're going in on day 1, you can watch the World First race for early insights. Even if there's no strategy set in stone, you can at least understand mechanics from watching the world racers. But if you're raiding later weeks, make sure to watch guides and study raid plans before jumping in. Especially if this is your first Savage, unless you really hate your party and want them to suffer. You can find guides on Discord servers, YouTube, and various websites. Usually, us Japanese players just use GameMate website for the strats. Number 8. If you're in static, prioritize DPS gear first. Savage loot is weekly restricted, so gearing efficiently is key. The best way of doing it is to prioritize DPS gears first, then tanks to healers depending on their DPS output. This is done in order to help with DPS checks, which could potentially skip some mechanics in the process. All of these will lead into a faster Reclear. Yes, it will be sad for the supports, but they'll be fine. Probably. Week 2 onwards or Reclears. Before we get into the final topic, have you subscribed yet? No? Well, please consider it a small parking fee for sticking around this long. I promise it's cheaper than actually parking in Lim Salaminsa. And hey, as a bonus, I make weekly videos, so it's like a loyalty program, except instead of free coffee, you get more Final Fantasy XIV rants and questionable takes. Sounds like a good deal, right? Anyway, back to the video. Number 9. Do split runs for faster gear. If you really pity your support because of the last point I made and you want to speed up the BIS gearing for your supports, try split runs, but you'll need alts. So if you don't know, split runs is when you use 4 main characters with 4 alts twice each week with all loots going to the main characters. For example, you run 4 main DPS with 4 alt supports in the first clear. Then you run 4 main supports with 4 alt DPS in the second clear. This way everyone get BIS in 4 weeks instead of 8. Unless you got lucky with weapon drops, it can be faster. Yes, alts are a hassle, and yes, you might have to pay for skips, but if you want maximum efficiency and leave the static with your supports happy, this is the way. Number 10. If you're doing PF, Reclear immediately after reset. The best party finder players clear as soon as possible, so your best bet is Tuesday at 12 AM PST. That's when the weekly reset time is. The longer you wait, the more likely you'll end up with, let's just say, varied skill levels. While some good players do Reclears on weekend, your best chances are still right after the reset. So I highly recommend you to do that every week until you get your BIS. This is especially true for servers with dead PFs like Elemental. F you Elemental players who went to mana for Reclears. So those are some of the key tips and tricks I've learned from my experience by doing Savage for the past 3 years. Do you have any other tips for Savage that I haven't mentioned? Please kindly drop them in the comment section down below. I'll see you next time and good luck in the upcoming Savage raid. Bye.